Hi YouTube. I'd like to talk about my time at uni. There were lots of American students at university, and because I love history, while studying, I talked to them a lot about the American Civil War. And what horrified me was that almost all the American students made excuses for the Confederacy. In case you don't know, the Confederacy were 11 southern states who seceded from the Union in 1861, and they fought to defend slavery. Just think about that for a minute. A civil war was fought over slavery. In Russia, 1861 they abolished the serfs, no civil war. Britain abolished slavery in 1834, just like that, no civil war there. But America, oh, a state trying to change things quickly through legislation. Oh god, yeah, has to have a civil war. So, 2% of Americans died in the Civil War, and a quarter of young white Southern men died. For what? Well, nothing really. If the South hadn't seceded from the Union, then slavery would have lasted longer. The South produced a lot of myths about the Civil War. They produced this myth that they were driven to it by Northern radicalism. The main reason they seceded was because Abraham Lincoln was elected. He didn't even appear on the ballot in the 10 southernmost states. But he didn't want to abolish slavery, he wanted to stop it spreading westward. He had no plans to abolish it where it existed. If they had just accepted it, slavery would have probably lasted a lot longer. There's this idea that the Civil War was about states' rights, nothing to do with slavery. Let me tell you, this is a ridiculous idea. First piece of evidence, the first two states to secede were South Carolina and Mississippi, and they were the only two states where white people were outnumbered by black people. Secondly, all 11 of these states which seceded were slave states. There were 21 free states, none of them seceded. If it was all about states' rights, how come it was all in the same area? Very strange. Third bit of evidence against this, 4 slave states didn't secede. Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, Missouri. And they were the northernmost ones, and the ones with the smallest proportion of planters and slaves in the population. I used to favour the South when I was little. When I was about 7 or 8 and I started watching videos about the Civil War. It's amazing! Oh, men on horseback, long cigars, huge big houses, beautiful countryside, nice rural background. It's all male varnish. It's all a veneer. Southern society was absolutely brutal. There are 5 million white Southerners, 4 million blacks. There were laws in some states which stopped them reading. Families were split up. Only 4% of them lived to the age of 60. They lived in dirt floor shacks. And people think white Southerners supported the Confederacy because they wanted to protect their rights. Let me tell you now, most white Southerners did not own slaves, so why did they back the Confederacy? Why weren't they abolitionists? Well, firstly, the planters often the poor white farmers were relatives of the planters. That was one thing. There was no secret ballot, so if you voted against the planters' interest, everyone would know. And a lot of these farmers were dependent on the planters for using cotton gins for credit because the banking system was so primitive. And a lot of whites could get a lot of kudos for being overseers or for being members of slave patrols. Slave patrols were groups of whites from all classes who would check on slaves who were outside of the plantation. And they could do pretty much anything to them if they didn't have a good excuse. You'd even kill them. After the Civil War, people think the blacks won it. They didn't. They might have got freedom, but they didn't have any land or money, and they refused to work on the plantations in the old-fashioned way. Even if they were paid a very good wage, they would not accept that. But at the same time, any planter who sold or rented land to blacks would be beaten up, if he was lucky, by the Ku Klux Klan. This is where sharecropping came in. That was the only thing Southern whites thought blacks were good enough to do. And of course, most black Southerners didn't get the vote till the 1960s, so the idea that they won the Civil War, I'm sorry, most of that death and carnage was for nothing. One final bit of evidence against this idea that the Civil War was about states' rights. If the Southerners hated centralised government so much, if they hated the federal government bullying the states so much, I don't really notice much of that with the Fugitive Slave Act or the Dred Scott decision. These were federal laws which were imposed on the states, which they had to accept. They were totally for that. And they didn't mind states' rights being trampled then, did they? Huh. Hope I haven't offended anyone, but these things have to be said because people love to say controversial things. I should know, I do it myself. But unless they've got evidence, I haven't got a problem with controversy, but unless they have evidence to back this up, then no way. One final thing, line from a speech made by Alexander Stephens, Vice President of the Confederacy at the beginning of the Civil War. He did a speech on the differences between Southern and Northern constitutions. And he said, "Our new government is based upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man." Interestingly enough, 4 years later, 1865, he's kept in prison. And then there's a similar speech, and it's all about states' rights all of a sudden. States' rights were an excuse. They were not a reason for the Civil War. Okay? If anyone disagrees with me, please feel free to send me messages. I love debates, and if anyone can prove me wrong, I don't think they will, but if anyone's got some evidence I don't know about, I would love to do it because I am an historian. I'm not just a YouTuber, and I do like to stay as accurate as possible. Okay, happy Halloween, everyone at YouTube. Bye bye.